Welcome to Camera Ready and Able, the podcast that explores the intersection of media change and personal growth. I'm your host, Barbara Barna-Abel, and my calling is to help you tap into your superpowers to thrive on camera and in life, and to make an impact on the world. This episode is brought to you by the phrase, I have skills, now what do I do with them? This is a relevant question, and I hear it all the time. How do I connect my skills to achieving my goals, and who needs what I've got? I'm delighted that here to discuss is multi-talented writer-producer Jolene Latimer, who is a reporter for sports app The Score, covering the NHL and the PWHL, the new Professional Women's Hockey League, and has covered marquee events such as the 2018 Winter Olympic Games, the World Series, the ESPYs, the WNBA Final, and the NBA Awards. Jolene's byline has appeared in the Associated Press, CBC, USA Today, People, and Teen Vogue. Wherever you find Jolene, she gets to the heart of the story, bringing a richer view of the athlete as a whole person. And that, my friends, is a superpower skill. Welcome to the podcast, Jolene.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here as a frequent listener. I'm now on the podcast, so I feel
I'm honored. You just made
circle.
my day. Thank you very much. Honestly, I really do love this topic. And so I want to start with the fact that you have bona fide training. You have a master's degree in specialized journalism from the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism at USC. Very, very impressive. And I believe in J School. So let's talk about skills in the real world. One, I'm interested in the level of professionalism you've mentioned learning in journalism school. And at the same time, I'm interested in hearing from you how what you've learned does and does not apply in the quote unquote real world.
Yeah, that's such a good question because I think a lot of people, whether they come out of a J School program or even just out of their undergrad, what you learn in school is that you can see the standard that you need to attain. And you learn what really good looks like, and sometimes even what it feels like in your own work. And then when you get out into the real world, there are so many competing factors that make it really, really hard for you to do your best. It's not an incubator anymore. It's real life, and it's really hard. And that for me, that really set me back quite a bit because there's this huge learning curve back out in the professional world that after you have all the skills, applying them is a totally different ballgame.
Can you give me a for instance?
For instance, when I first got out of J School, I was a stringer for the Associated Press, which was very exciting. And I actually covered the Dodgers, and that first year they went to the World Series. So I went from graduating my J School program to just a few months later being at the World Series as a reporter, which is a crazy whirlwind. And when you're in the moment trying to write something to deadline and you're trying to get a quote out of a player who just lost a really important game, things don't go according to plan necessarily. So the perfect idea that you had in your head in J School, where you know how to put together a piece and you understand how it should fit, in the real world, when you're on a deadline and it's 3 a.m. and you don't have, the quote isn't perfect and you have no chance to go get another quote because the players have left, you really have to try to figure out how to piece it together. And that's when the professionalism comes in.
Oh, go deeper, because I love this, because it's also just fun behind the scenes. I just keep kipping my own desk, so sorry, listeners. No, I really love this. Please go deeper into, how you deal with this, bringing us behind the scenes into, well, can you just like describe the scene? It's like, how many other reporters are there? It's like, it's sweaty. It's like all these things. Like, how do you go up to somebody who's bummed out and like stick a microphone in their face?
Yeah, that's where being like a professional and coming into your own as a human really helps with the work side of it, because it is really hard. Because when you're in school, you maybe have days to turn around an assignment. And if it doesn't quite work, you can go to your professor and talk about another source that you can work in. Or sometimes I remember in journalism school, if I couldn't find a source I could interview, then I used a study or I used data to kind of supplement. So you can sort of work around some roadblocks. In the real world, especially when you're writing to deadline, that obviously isn't an option. And also you're contending with other real humans who all have other agendas and other manners that maybe you're not used to. So it could be just, especially for the World Series, it's so crowded. Or if you cover an NFL football game, because there's tons of reporters that come out to those. So the locker rooms are always super, super crowded. People aren't really letting you get into the scrum. You have to elbow your way in. It's sweaty. You're short. Your arm is tired. You can't hold it out there for 45 minutes while, guy after guy comes through. So it's exhausting. You might not get the full quote. You might not hear it all because it's loud in there. And those are the roadblocks that in order to survive, even being just a stringer, you really have to figure out how to overcome very, very rapidly. So I remember like that first season that I covered baseball, there were a lot of quotes that I didn't get the full quote because it was so loud and I was at the back of the scrum and I just could not hear on my audio. It just did not come through the full quote. And imagine being in the club or in the press box afterwards at 3 a.m. after everybody has left, and your editor needs that, or your journalist that you're working for needs that for their story, and you just cannot hear the quote. You play it back many times, you cannot hear the quote.
What do you
And
do?
that, I very quickly learned how to make friends in the press box because as much as you are competitors, you also need to help each other out. So I do remember that first World Series. There was another woman in the press box. There's usually not a lot of women in the press box about my age. And I had to go sheepishly to her and ask if she had the quotes, and she emailed them to me, which was a huge act of generosity. And that's where making friends and contributing to other people and what they're doing really comes in, because yeah, you are trying to compete with people, but at the same time, you also need to cooperate.
I love that you said that because at the end of the day, such an important aspect of any career, but especially in this one, is making and developing relationships and growing them and sustaining them. And it's those relationships, I know from the other conversations we've had, that helps you get further and further into the scrum, or what it's like for you now, often being the only woman in the locker room, at an NHL game, for instance. I want to get deep into this, but I do want to step back for a sec just to get your background. It's like, what prompted you even to go to J school? Had you been already working in media? You do both print and on camera. And for people listening, this is really interesting, is the going back and forth, and how do you make the leap to on camera? When do you zig and zag, all those things, because this is at the crux of what the conversation is about, is you have all these skills. How are you going to use them to get where you want to go, which is ultimately, to the top of the food chain?
Yeah. So before I went to do my master's in journalism, I did work in media, but I wasn't working at the level that I wanted to. And this kind of comes back to I have skills, now what? And that's almost always been a theme in my life at every level. So we just talked about how after my master's, I felt like I had skills, but I had to learn this other level of professionalism in these big scrums. Well, before my master's, I felt like I had skills, but I had to learn how to get my name into bigger places. I had to learn how to cover bigger events and get in there. And so my very first thing that I ever did in what I would consider the media was I was always writing little blogs and stuff, but it's not necessarily something I was super proud to attach my name to. But I interned at Coachella in my undergrad. And then I stuck around Coachella as a freelancer for a long time, just doing absolutely anything that I could possibly do. I just loved music. I loved being backstage. I loved festivals. And one year at Coachella, because people knew I wrote blogs as a side gig, they gave me the job that I was completely unqualified for, of copy editing the Coachella magazine that goes out. I think it's like the Thursday or Friday before every festival. And I was definitely unqualified for it. And I was very nervous. And as soon as it came out, I was just had this pit in my stomach because I knew that there was going to be a typo or some like glaring grammatical error somewhere, because I just did not know what I was doing. But I was also very excited because I wanted to see my name in the masthead, because I had never seen that before. So I grabbed the copy, just sweaty hands, just didn't want to open it, but I did want to open it. Finally, I open it. First thing I look at is the masthead. And the only typo in the entire magazine was in my name on the masthead. So I still have that. I still have that copy. And that was my first experience with writing. And at the same weekend, I got my first experience with professional video with Coachella, where a bunch of our sponsors needed someone to do person on the street interviews, just the concert goers inside the festival. So I went out there, never done it before, interviewing a bunch of festival goers. And I wasn't on camera. I was just producing that. But I knew then, I'm like, this is awesome. I love doing this. This is what I really, really want to do this with my life. And obviously I wasn't very good because I made a typo in my own name. And I don't know what that sponsored content looked like. I never watched it back. But from that point on, I took any job that I can get in media. And some of them are really small at outlets that are now, history. Never can't even find my work online anymore, thank goodness. But slowly but surely, I just kept asking myself, okay, how do I leverage my skills? How do I get better? How do I become the person I think I can be? And that's what led me to grad school originally.
But just to recap, because I love this, I appreciate that. It's like I'm saying, you were in the yes and phase because you understood you needed experience, which is really, really, really smart. At the same time, it's like when they said, go shoot this, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go produce something. I've never done this before. Literally what goes through your head, aside, taking the panic side out of it. I meant like on a practical, like step 1, step 2, step 3, like because you're extremely strategic thinker. I know this from knowing you. So you're figuring out in real time, how am I going to do this? And if it's because somebody asked you like, how do I do this now, Jolene? I've got to go do this and I've never done it. You would say to them, go do what?
Oh, well, actually, what went through my head was, how do I get myself on camera doing this?
I love it.
I didn't succeed with that, though. I had to be off camera for that. I don't know. I mean, I felt confident doing that. I think what goes through your head is, how do I get enough people in the 1 or 2 hours that I have to give the sponsor lots of options. And you just have to go out there and be gregarious and not think at all about how awkward it is to approach people on the street, which it is awkward. And you just kind of have to go out there and get it done. And what helps, and this is what always helps with everything, is having a really good team. And luckily, the camera person who I was with was quite experienced. So the stuff that I missed as a producer, they caught because they had done a lot of this before. So I think anytime that you can partner with somebody who really knows what they're doing and listen to them and learn from them, you can rely on that to kind of help you get to the next level, help you figure it out.
So at what point then do you say, I'm really loving this. I think journalism school is going to help me get to the next level?
After that Coachella, I went through a couple different outlets that were all kind of smaller, and they don't really exist anymore. But at one of them, we did a lot of big red carpets, which I absolutely loved. It's, like the kind where they close off Hollywood Boulevard, and, it's the whole afternoon. And then at the end of the carpet, there's a big party. And I loved that kind of stuff. But I was writing questions for our host. And I thought to myself, I'm doing all this research, I'm writing these questions. I'm also participating in the edit afterwards. Why am I not asking the questions? I want to be the person asking these questions. So I thought, if, maybe the market is telling me I'm not quite good enough to ask these questions. Maybe there's some skill that I don't have, or some confidence that I don't have, where people are looking at me and just passing me over and saying, no, not her. So that's when I thought, okay, I have to go get that confidence. I have to go get those skills. I need to go back, do my master's. And then hopefully when I come out of that, I will be at that level where I can be the person asking the questions.
And I love this for anybody who was listening, because we talk about it a lot of times, but it's, when you want to be on camera, to understand the skills that go into that are way beyond holding the camera and actually asking the questions, is if you can think like a producer. Because the most successful people I can think of, Andy Cohen comes from being a producer in news. Brian Balthazar, who's been on the podcast, who I love, is incredible on camera. He's a producer. Elizabeth Wagmeister, who's, crushing at CNN, she knows how to produce. So keep going, but I understand it's like you had the grounding and the fact that you could write those questions and understood why that is the essence of it. I feel like, sometimes it's a heavier lift, learning to be good on camera, which I love. It's, great, like that can be learned. So, okay, so now you've gone to J school, and like when you get out, and it's awesome that you got hired by, so how did you even get hired by the, was it the NBA, or what outlet were you working for?
The Associated Press.
Oh, okay,
So I
just a
worked as a stringer.
minor little news organization, the Associated Press. I mean, so like, I meant like, how do you get there? Or is that part of the thing? It's like, I'm in a very prestigious journalism school, that helps open a door. I'm trying to connect those dots for people listening.
Certainly that did help open a door. And I would be completely remiss if I didn't say that my sports professor in my program opened a lot of doors for me. The reason that that door opened is because in my first semester, I never wanted to be a sports journalist, but I had to take a sports class. And it was in LA, and you had to pick a beat. So you had to pick a sport to cover for the whole semester. And I was like, well, I don't really like, what sport am I going to do? I don't know any sports. And I remembered that actually I am a curling expert. I know curling really well because I grew up in Canada. And I curled at, a decently high level within my province. And I was like, I can do this. I can cover curling. So I went to my professor and I was like, I don't know if you have even heard of curling. It's the Olympic sport with the brushes and all that. And I did not know this, but he was one of the foremost Olympic reporters in the US. So he was just extremely excited that somebody picked a niche Olympic sport. So I covered curling for the semester, but about a week after I announced to him that I was going to cover curling, he got an email from the World Curling Federation. And it's like, I wish, this is crazy. I'm not making it up. Like, it sounds too perfect, but they said, if you have anybody in your class who wants to cover curling, we have a contest. If they enter, they could win a trip to Scotland to cover at the European Championships. And so he said, oh my God, you have to enter. You're going to win this thing. I did win it. I went to Scotland over Thanksgiving that year. I covered the European Championships. And after that, I was a sports reporter.
How
That's
cool
how
is this?
that's how I got into it. And because I had just a little bit more experience than everybody else in my class, any opportunity that kind of came down the pipeline, I was sort of first up for it. So I had that little edge kind of right at the beginning. And that's what helped me get the Associated Press gig.
Okay, I just have to have a moment to celebrate all of this because again, you went hyper niche,
Mhm.
which is we hear this all the time and people are afraid of that. And yet you created an opportunity, stepped into an opportunity. The universe said, we hear you, Jolene. What else can we give you? This is great. And the other thing that I love fast forwarding is because you're doing so great in sports and the fact that then you kind of signed hockey and you're like, okay, I know I'm Canadian, but so now fast forward a little bit, because it's such a practical thing about I have the skills, what do I do? This is a great example of like, I have the skills, I can adapt. So can you explain how, in a paragraph or two, how you get handed something you know nothing about and then you crush it?
Yeah, well, I do want to talk about the niche. Can I say one thing about the niche thing?
Of
Because
course,
I
it's your
think people don't think
conversation.
about this often enough. People always say you have to go to a small market in order to advance your career, and that is one strategy, and that works for a lot of people. But a different strategy is finding something very niche, and there's a lot of opportunities in that, similar to how it would be in a small market. So instead of a small market, I chose a small sport in curling. And actually, from that curling experience, for many years after that, I worked for the World Curling Federation as a freelancer, and they flew me all around the world to cover their championships. So I got all the experience that I needed as a journalist. I got to do stuff on video. I got to do writing stuff. I was helping train interns just because I picked a really niche sport. So I think that whatever way that you do decide to go niche, it is important to start small because you're going to get way more opportunities there. But then as far as switching to a bigger sport that you maybe don't know that much about, that happened to me with baseball. Right out of my master's, didn't know much about baseball. I was a curling reporter and I got this opportunity to cover baseball. Okay. I went to the library, got all the baseball history books because I felt like I needed a background that I didn't have. And then I started learning as I was going. And whenever I would be talking to a manager and they would use a word I didn't know, I would discreetly write that down on my notepad, quickly go try to learn that so I could get up to speed because I was really behind speed. So when you are in something you don't know, I don't get enough opportunities to say no to anything. And that's always been my saying. So if I don't know baseball, whatever, I'm going to figure it out. But you really have to do a lot more homework because you are quite a ways behind. And that same thing happened to me with hockey. I've grown up watching hockey my entire life, and I was a hockey fan, and I love hockey. I'm reporting on hockey now. I've never reported on hockey before. Reporting on something is a little bit different than being a fan of it or reading or watching it because you have to have a way, way more in-depth understanding. Because any way a conversation goes, you kind of have to be able to ask a follow-up question. And if you only have a surface level understanding, then you're not going to know the next question. So even with hockey, even though I grew up watching it, I still find myself having to spend a lot of time doing my homework to go deep on things that I don't have the full context on. That I'm in the process of that with the whole new sport right now.
I want to point out here too, because I'm really, really impressed. And admire your work ethic and your commitment, but also want to point out how tough sports is or are, because in entertainment and pop culture, there's not an expectation of having deep knowledge. It tends to be surfacey, and then when the handful of people who really know their stuff tend to really rise. But sports, the audience, the fans will eat you alive. Forget that, the managers and the players and the organizations, like they'll know, but the fans will eviscerate you if you don't know your stuff. It's
Totally.
like there's no wiggle room here, and it's very, very impressive what you've accomplished.
Even if you word something the wrong way in an article, and I have many editors go over my stuff. I don't just write something and put it out there. There's at least two other people who look at it. And if it's worded like slightly weird where fans it just sounds wrong to them, even after two other people have looked at it, the comments will just zone in on that one thing. And you're like, hey, sorry, I don't think that's wrong. But even if they perceive it to be wrong, that's the problem. And you're right, it is specific to sports. It's because people are so passionate about sports.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a great thing. And that's the power and beauty of sports. And that's why I love them. And you have to know that if you're getting into it, that's part of it. That's responsibility. That's the game. You got to know it because everybody else knows it. So you really have to respect that part of it.
Wait, let's to be clarify one sec. You didn't start out to get in sports, and now you're doing really well in sports. So what were your Jeopardy categories before you got, hurled into curling and a sports career?
I wanted to do music reporting because I came from Coachella. So I just thought, obviously, I would do music. And I worked at a record label for a while. I worked at Capitol Records briefly. So I was just in the music industry. So I always just thought that that would be what I would do. And the only reason I took that sports class is because I wanted to learn how to write profiles on musicians, which I've never done now, never ever. But I've written a lot of profiles on athletes. And when I got the opportunities, like I said, I don't get enough opportunities to turn one down. So, or at least especially at that time. So I just said yes and exactly yes and whatever, I'll do it. Like, yeah, let me learn it. And I developed a passion for sports while I was in it. And now I would never really want to do anything else. I love sports reporting. I love the people I've met, love the athletes, love my colleagues. I love the stories I've told. But I didn't know that I was going to love it at all. And I developed a passion for it as I went along.
So what do you consider your skills?
Oh, good question. I know that I am very skilled at getting people to talk. And I think that's one of the number one things is engaging people in a conversation, especially with the kind of work that I'm doing now, which is a lot of feature reporting. So I don't do the daily news or the game stories the way that I did when I first started. And for those, you just need a soundbite. So getting someone to open up, and it's not even like the right context. They're not going to open up after losing the World Series. They're going to give you 3 words. But now I do 3,000 word stories. So I really need people to go deep with me and give me a lot of information about themselves. And our conversation has to take some twists and turns so that I can come up with almost like a character arc for that 3,000 word story. So right now, I would say that that's my most valuable skill is being able to engage people and get that out of them.
And you can do that in print and you can do that on camera. So now you've got these amazing skills. What do you see the challenges ahead of you? Like where do you want to go? What are the
There
challenges?
are so many challenges ahead of me. That's why I don't have one specific answer. The hardest thing, and I think this is always the hardest thing, is that when you don't get opportunities all the time. And so you really have to maximize them when you get them. And I think that's always the hardest thing. So I feel like every day, I was just looking at my 2024 goals now, or earlier today. And there's so many little things that, you have to do in order to get to the next level. And I think that's always the hardest thing. It's just grinding and hoping that if you do all these little things, you'll get lucky somewhere along the way and get that next opportunity that'll lead to the next thing. That's always the biggest challenge. And in our industry, you can't predict where that next thing is going to come from. So you just have to have a little faith and focus on getting runners in scoring position. I always think about it like that, like just getting people on base. And that's not easy. That's really hard. It's hard in the day-to-day. The day-to-day is the biggest challenge.
Well, so much there, right? So let's talk about grinding and how you keep going through the grind, because it's actually a very physically taxing job that you have. They're long hours and you're constantly, crashing on deadlines and you're in sweaty rooms.
Yeah, especially during playoffs. Playoffs is hard. Yeah, rooms are always sweaty and it usually smells like dude in there
Wait,
because
wait, and I want to be, laughing aside, but as a woman who's a reporter, you have to look cute in a
it's true.
room full of sweaty, stinky players. A lot of your male colleagues do not have to look cute.
It's true. It's
Yeah.
true. Yeah, you always have to be looking good. Well, it's different. It's different in hockey because in hockey there is a kind of an unspoken rule that the male reporters always wear suits.
Mm.
So they do look professional. It's not like that in every other sport, but for sure in hockey they do look good. But yeah, there's definitely a bigger onus on women to be looking good. It's a visual industry, so you have to be presenting as professional. And it's a workplace. So even though it's a locker room, it's not a rec center locker room. It is a workplace, so you always have to be looking good. There's that pressure. That actually hit me in a weird way I think like a week ago. I was covering hockey game, and I went in the press box at the second intermission. I went to go get a tea, and I was the only woman in the press box that day. There might have been others around, I don't know, but they weren't there at that moment. And it was just probably like 30 guys. Also, they weren't getting tea, they were getting pizza because these like the male reporters, they always eat pizza and cookies for the press meal. And they were all crowded around this one TV watching another game that was happening. And the TV was right on top of the tea. And I was in like a nice dress. And I felt so uncomfortable going to get my tea in front of all of them. Just that weird push-pull where I'm like, oh, I know that I like look good. I don't want everyone looking at me right now as the only woman. There was one other woman in there. She was the server. And she was like, is everything okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm just like waiting for this group of men to break up before I go get my tea because I don't want everybody looking because I knew I was wearing a nice dress and I just didn't want all that attention on me. And luckily that's the power of other women in the room because she was like, I'll go get the tea for you. Don't worry. Don't stress out about it. Like I don't feel weird. It doesn't bother me. So you do have to look good. And there is a weird kind of dichotomy where people notice you because you are the only woman a lot of times. And there's always a different way to deal with that. Luckily, my girl came in for me this time and she covered for me. She went and got my tea because I felt weird, but different circumstances, you take a different approach.
So you keep grinding. I love that you've actually written your goals, which I recommend for everyone. And and I really do believe in the notion that luck is when, preparation meets opportunity, but also persistence. And that's like the sticking with. But the other thing I want to talk about is the relationship building and the discoverability. And can you speak to that at all about, because that's constantly evolving for you?
You're trying to get me a lot better on discoverability. We've been working on that for a while. That's probably my weakest point. And just putting yourself out there. I'm so good at doing it behind the scenes, and I love connecting with people behind the scenes. That would to me be the more relationship building where you're on, you go to a panel and then you meet people after, or you're in the press box and you get chatty with people. And I actually have developed some of my best friendships through doing that. Truly, my best friendships are people that I have covered games with. The person who hired me for the AP as a stringer is one of my dearest friends. And that's all from genuinely connecting. It's not just trying to get my next game with her. I actually really connected with her. When you go overseas and you do these international competitions, you really bond with the people that you're covering those with. So relationship building for me is a very genuine thing because I really, really do love all the people who I end up working with. Well, most of the people I end up working with. Um, and I think that does lend itself to discoverability because you're kind of top of mind. Well, one area where I'm weak is that I don't really present to everybody with the full list of things that I can do. I have to get better at that. Yeah.
So how would you do that?
I'm working on that. I think defining the list for myself has been a big part of it because sometimes I even forget, like, oh my gosh, I've done that before. I even forget that I have that capability. And so I think like becoming more sure of myself just internally has been leading myself to present myself more confidently and professionally when I do make those relationships.
Because we talked about, I mean, you have the hard skills as a journalist, but what's really propelling you is these soft skills, right? The ability to connect and engage, and then also, and to get people to open up, which is amazing. So do you have a dream interview?
No, somebody asked me that the other day, and I don't actually, because I don't care that much about celebrity. I care really more about the story. So my dream interview would be doing a story that just was a historic story that people remembered forever, and finding the one piece of that story that really brought it all home for the reader or the viewer. That would be my dream. But as far as a celebrity, I've interviewed a lot of I interviewed LeBron, I interviewed Clayton Kershaw, who I think is one of the greatest pitchers of all time. I've interviewed, like, I guess everybody. And on the red carpet, I interviewed a lot of people, so I don't have anyone that I'm just itching to talk to. But it's more the story that I would love to get.
Oh, I love that. Are there any writers then that you really admire, or like, careers that you look at going, okay, that's my North Star?
There are a lot of current women in sports who I follow, and I love their work. And the person who I always think about is Christine Simpson. She's become a bit of a mentor to me. She does features for Hockey Night in Canada, and I love the way that she approaches her work. And she's also been guiding me to just embrace the grind, embrace the day-to-day, and that's how you build a career. And she's had a really, really long career. So as a current contemporary, I really, really like her work. And as somebody in the past, I have always, always, always been motivated by Nora Ephron's writing. She's a remarkable writer. And sometimes when I just kind of lose my voice, I go back and read some of her personal essays. And for whatever reason, that brings it back. And I think a lot of women in journalism have either wanted to be her or Barbara Walters. So she's a classic.
Final question. Do you have any advice for anybody listening who's thinking, oh, wow, I've wanted to do this and I didn't know where to start?
Yes, I have advice. And this is something that I spent the last 2 years. I wish I would have learned it sooner. I wish I would have learned this a long time ago. Don't try to homer. Don't try to get a home run. Just try to get somebody on base. Just get a walk. Just try to get some runners in scoring position. Because I spent the majority of my career from my undergrad up until like 2 years ago trying to get home runs.
What does that mean to translate?
Trying to swing for the fences, do something really big, get a documentary made, or pitch a show that I'm the host of, or get a book written, or I felt this pressure to do something really big because I feel like I can, and I still feel like I can. I just realized that is the worst way to go about it, because if you watch a baseball game that's like a slugfest where people are just trying to hit it out of the park with every pitch, it's usually a really low scoring game. It's not a good way to get people home. And when you're in your career, you got to run up the score a little bit. You got to get people home. So instead of swinging for the fences, you should really just try to get on base, even if that means a walk. You should really just try to get something across the plate, the home plate. Just scratch a run across, even if it's not pretty. It doesn't have to be beautiful. You just got to get some points on the board. So when I started shifting my mindset, that's when things started working out a lot better for me.
That's incredible. I love it. Jolene, thank you so much. You're coming back. Please say
yes. Thank you for having me. I can't wait to watch this.
Oh, well,
I feel so honored.
I'll keep you posted. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jolene, and thank you for listening to Camera Ready and Able. If you have a moment, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to Camera Ready and Able. It really does help. And then please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already.